Welcome back to the Proverbs series, guys. For today's video specifically, I want to go to chapter 21, verse 21, which reads, "Whoever pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity, and honor." The reason I wanted to look at this verse in particular is because, I can't speak for anyone else, right? But at least for myself, right? Like, I spend a significant portion of my life pursuing things, right? And I feel like that is the reality, honestly, for most of us, right? A degree, a career, stability, relationships, recognition. The list varies from person to person, as I said, but the underlying activity is the same, right? We identify what we want and then we go after it. And that is not a character flaw, because obviously pursuit is built into us as humans, but the question is never really whether we will pursue something. The question is what we have decided is worth pursuing. And Proverbs 21:21 answers that question with a directness that cuts through the noise of every competing answer our culture offers, right? It doesn't say pursue happiness and find it. It doesn't say pursue success and find it. It says pursue righteousness and love. Two things our culture rarely puts at the top of the priority list, and find life, prosperity, and honor. Three things our culture is spending enormous energy chasing through entirely different means. And so the verse is essentially a reordering of the pursuit itself. It's saying that the outcomes most people want are available, but the path most people are taking to reach them is the wrong one. And the right path, counterintuitively, runs directly through the things they were not prioritizing. So that is a bold claim, and I think it deserves a careful look. And so let's break down the verse, right? Whoever pursues righteousness and love. The verb pursues is one of the most important words in the verse, and it is worth establishing what it actually means before even moving on to what is being pursued. The Hebrew word for pursue is radaf, and it is strong, active, energetic as a word, right? It is the same word used for chasing, hunting, and pursuing an enemy in battle. It describes wholehearted, sustained, directional effort towards something. So it's not the passive hope that righteousness and love will somehow develop in us over time without much effort. No. It is the active, ongoing, and deliberate chase. And this matters because it reframes both righteousness and love from passive states we might drift into toward active destinations we have to genuinely go after. Right? We tend to think of righteousness as something we either have or do not have based on our moral performance, and love as something we feel or do not feel based on our emotional state. Right? Proverbs 21:21 treats both of them as something we pursue, which implies that they are always ahead of us, always requiring us to keep moving towards them, and always demanding more than our current position has achieved. Righteousness, tzedakah, we have encountered multiple times in this series, right? It is the quality of being in right alignment with God's character and covenant, encompassing moral integrity, just treatment of others, and the kind of generosity toward the vulnerable that we examined back in Proverbs 19:17. So it's not a narrow, rule-keeping definition of righteousness, right? It's a broad, character-level orientation toward what is genuinely good and right. Love, which is said in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, is one of the most theologically loaded words in the entire Bible. And I think it deserves careful attention here. As said is often translated as steadfast love, loving kindness, or royal love, right? It's the word used throughout the Old Testament for God's covenant faithfulness towards his people, the love that does not quit, does not vary with circumstances, and does not depend on the worthiness of the recipient. Psalm 136 repeats his hesed endures forever 26 times in a single psalm, which gives you a sense of how central this concept is to the character of God. And so when Proverbs 21 pairs hesed with righteousness as the objects of our pursuit, it is describing a person who is going after both moral integrity and covenant faithfulness simultaneously, right? Not just doing the right thing in the abstract, but doing it with the kind of loyal, enduring love towards God and others that holds even when it is costly. So these two things together describe the full-orbed character that the verse promises will lead somewhere worth going. I think actually Micah 6:8, right, is the verse that that summarizes very well what pursuing righteousness and hesed looks like in practice. It says, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does our Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God," right? And so doing justice is the righteous dimension. Loving kindness is the hesed dimension, right? Walking humbly with God is the relationship that makes both sustainable. And so Proverbs 21:21 and Micah 6:8 are making the same point from slightly different angles, but it's the same point. So let's talk about finds life, prosperity, and honor, right? Because the three outcomes Solomon promises are worth examining individually because each one is deeper than its surface meaning suggests, right? Life, which is Shaim in the Hebrew sense, is not merely biological existence, right? It is life in its fullest, most vital expression, the kind of life that is actually worth living. Throughout Proverbs, life in this sense is constantly linked to wisdom, righteousness, and the fear of the Lord. It is the opposite of the living death described in the portrait of the fool, going through the motions of existence without the depth, meaning, and vitality that genuine life contains. So when Jesus says in John 10:10, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly," right, he is using the same concepts. Life is not just existence, it is flourishing existence, and Proverbs 21:21 says the person pursuing righteousness and love finds it. And then we have prosperity, right? Tzedakah, which we've mentioned earlier, is actually the same word as righteousness in the Hebrew, which creates a deliberate and striking connection in the original language. The pursuit of righteousness leads to finding more righteousness. The character you chase becomes the character you find more of. And this is the compounding principle we have seen throughout Proverbs applied to character itself. Pursuing righteousness in living produces an increase in the very thing being pursued. The ESV version translates it as prosperity, which captures a real dimension of the Hebrew, but the connection to the righteousness in the same word should not be lost. Because what the pursuer of righteousness finds is, in part, more of what they were pursuing. And then we have honor, right? Kavod. It's a word that carries the sense of weight, substance, and genuine reputation. It's the honor that comes from actually being a certain kind of person rather than from managing appearances or pursuing recognition directly. And we encountered this principle back in Proverbs 11:12, even, where pride chases honor and finds disgrace, while humility simply exists in the condition where wisdom is present. And so the pattern is consistent. Pursuing honor directly tends to produce its counterfeit. Pursuing righteousness and love tends to produce the real thing, because genuine honor is the natural recognition that follows genuine character. And I think this is where the verse contains its most counterintuitive insight, that life, prosperity, and honor are precisely the things most people are directly pursuing. The outcomes our culture has identified as the markers of a successful life. And Proverbs 21:21 does not say these things are wrong to want, but it says the way most people are going about obtaining them is backwards. Pursue the outcomes directly and they tend to slip away or arrive hollow, but pursue righteousness and love and then the outcomes follow. And I think Matthew 6:33 is a New Testament verse that captures the same logic most directly, and it's impossible to read Proverbs 21:21 without it. It says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." All these things Jesus is referring to are the practical provision and flourishing described in the preceding verses. Seek them first and they tend to elude us. Seek the kingdom and righteousness first and they are added. And the adding is the finding of Proverbs 21:21. Life, prosperity, and honor are not prizes we win by pursuing them. They are byproducts we receive by pursuing something better. So now I want to get practical. I want to get applicable here because, as I always say in my videos, I truly believe that is, the turning knowledge into action is one of the most important parts of our Christian walk. And so the first thing is to examine what we are actually pursuing with the energy of Radaf. All right, the honest diagnostic this verse invites is a look at what we are genuinely chasing with the wholehearted, sustained, energetic pursuit that Radaf describes. Most of us are Radaf-ing something, right? But the question is what? And if we tracked how we actually spend our time, attention, mental energy, and ambition over the course of a typical week, what would emerge as the genuine object of our most intense pursuit? For many of us, the honest answer would not be righteousness and love, but it would be something on the list of outcomes. comfort, recognition, financial security, status, or some combination of them. But Proverbs 21:21 does not condemn us for wanting those things, but it does invite us to honestly reconsider whether we want or whether the thing we are most intensely chasing is the thing that actually leads to what we want. Second thing, practice pursuing Hesed in the relationships that cost us the most. Since Hesed is specifically the love that holds when it is costly, the practical expression of pursuing it is not found in the easy relationships, but in the hard ones, right? The friendship that requires more from us than it gives back right now. The family member who is difficult to love consistently. The coworker whose behavior tests our patience on a regular basis. The commitment to a community that has disappointed us. Pursuing Hesed in those contexts, choosing the loyal, enduring love that does not quit when quitting would be understandable, is not just a character exercise, because according to Proverbs 21:21, it is the activity that leads toward the life, prosperity, and honor that are worth having. And so the pursuit of Hesed is most genuinely tested and most genuinely formed in exactly the places where it's hardest to maintain. Then the third thing, right, is to trust the promise enough to reorder our actual priorities. I think the deepest application of this verse is an act of trust. It requires believing that the counterintuitive logic of this verse is actually true, that pursuing righteousness and love really does lead to life, prosperity, and honor, even when the evidence in our immediate circumstances is not visible yet. And that kind of trust isn't blind, but it's the same trust that the entire book of Proverbs has been building a case for, that God's wisdom about how life works is more reliable than our instinctive assumptions about it. And so practically, reordering our priorities based on this verse might mean making decisions that look suboptimal by conventional measures, but are clearly right by the measure of righteousness and love. So, taking a career path that preserves integrity over the one that maximizes the income. Investing time in a relationship that needs Hesed over the activity that builds status, right? These are not sacrifices in the deepest sense. They are the pursuit that the verse promises leads somewhere that is genuinely worth going. And so, let me just give a closing thought here, right? Because I feel like this verse, Proverbs 21:21, is one of the most quietly radical verses in the entire Bible because of what it does with our desires rather than what it does against them. It doesn't tell us to stop wanting life, prosperity, and honor, but it does tell us that we've been going about getting them the wrong way. And so the person pursuing life directly tends to miss it. The person pursuing righteousness and love tends to find it as part of the package. And that's not a bait and switch, right? It's the consistent logic of a God whose wisdom about how things work is simply more reliable than our instincts about what to chase. So as this verse tells us, man, pursue righteousness, pursue Hesed, and discover that what you were really after was already waiting at the end of that road.